So what happens when a prominent politician warns that a nation is on the verge of losing its entire identity? Today, we're diving into the pretty controversial arguments of Australian politician Pauline Hanson. We're going to explore her claims about a creeping threat and the surprising political momentum she's gaining from it. Okay, so her entire case really kicks off with this pretty stark warning. And look, it's not just a quick soundbite for the news. This is the absolute core of her message. She believes there's this slow, kind of invisible change happening that's about to trigger a really sudden and dramatic shift in Australian society. So let's unpack exactly what she means by that.
So where's this all coming from, this sense of an impending crisis? Well, for Hanson, the answer isn't actually in Australia. It's abroad. She's pointing directly at Great Britain and using it as a kind of cautionary tale. The whole frame for her argument is built on what she claims is already going down over there.
And she really hammers this point home again and again in the interview. She keeps saying the UK is this huge warning sign. In her view, it's a nation that's, losing its core identity, losing its Christian faith. And she's basically holding it up like a mirror to Australians and saying, look, this is our future if we don't change course right now.
And that brings us to really the central pillar of her entire argument. See, for Hanson, this isn't just a numbers game about immigration. It goes deeper. It's all about what she calls an incompatible ideology, one that she believes is just fundamentally at odds with Western culture.
So what does she actually mean by incompatible? It's a strong word, right? Well, in the interview, she makes a point to distinguish between Islam as a religion and Islam as a complete ideology. She sees it as a whole system of beliefs and laws that, she argues, just cannot coexist with Australian values and its Christian heritage. And here are the specific things she points to as proof. She brings up calls for Sharia law, she talks about the Burka as a symbol of female subjugation, and she points to what she calls hate speech happening on the streets. She even takes it a step further and frames it historically, mentioning countries like Egypt and Lebanon, which she says were once Christian nations that were, in her words, taken over. Okay, but how does she connect all of that back to Australia? I mean, what specific evidence is she offering to back up these claims at home? Let's take a look at the actual numbers, the stats, and the events she's using to build her case. All right, so she starts with an official statistic. About 4% of Australia's population identifies as Muslim. Now, on the surface, you think, okay, that's a pretty small number, and that's exactly the point the interviewer brings up. And yeah, as you can see here, that 4% is just a small slice of the overall pie. The interviewer definitely points this out. But Hanson's whole argument is that this one number is super misleading, that it totally fails to capture the full picture of what she sees as a growing and much larger influence. So this is how she tries to argue that there's an outsized impact. She points to certain federal electorates where she claims the Muslim vote can hit 30%, which could potentially sway Democratic outcomes. And then she brings up very specific security concerns, things like the Bondi attack, the number of people on terror watch lists, and those chants of kill the Jews in Sydney to really try and make her case. Now, of course, a message this controversial is going to face some serious opposition, right? Hanson claims that instead of actually debating her on the facts, her opponents just used political labels to try and shut her down. So let's look at her perspective on this whole battle over language. The interviewer puts it to her directly, asks her flat out, and this gives her the perfect opportunity to pivot into her defense. Her answer is really revealing. It tells you a lot about how she sees the political landscape and all the accusations she faces. And this really captures the conflict perfectly, at least from her point of view. On one side, you have her saying she's just speaking the truth for the Australian people and standing up for free speech. And on the other side, she sees her opponents using these labels, racist, Islamophobic, and even hate speech laws, almost like weapons to silence a message that she claims they just can't beat with arguments. Yeah, and this quote pretty much sums up her whole position. She doesn't see these labels as legitimate criticism at all. Nope. Instead, she frames them as a deliberate political strategy. And, in her own words, it's the only strategy her opponents have, because she claims they can't actually challenge the substance of what she's saying. So the big question is, with a message this controversial, is it actually working? I mean, how are Australian voters responding to all this? Let's take a look at the real-world political momentum her party, One Nation, has been building up. Well, she points right to this very concrete result. In a recent election, her party pulled in nearly a quarter of the vote. Now, that's not just some protest vote.
That translated into a pretty significant breakthrough, with new seats in both houses of parliament.
And it's not just about what happens on Election Day either. She brings up this poll that asked people, hey, which party would best handle immigration? And get this, a pretty remarkable 40% of the people who answered chose her party, One Nation.
And this chart really puts that 40% into some stark context. On immigration, which is, the central issue of her entire platform, her party is polling at more than double its nearest competitors, the big established parties, Labor and the Liberals. It's a pretty clear sign that her message is resonating with a huge chunk of the electorate. So, how does she explain this huge surge in support? Well, she says it's all down to what she calls a public awakening. She argues that everyday Australians are just plain fed up, that they want change, and that they're now using their people power at the ballot box to, in her view anyway, reclaim their country and its values.
And all of this really brings us to the fundamental question that's right at the heart of Pauline Hanson's argument. She's presenting a choice, framing this whole thing as a critical crossroads for the country. The question she's forcing into the mainstream is basically this: can a Western nation embrace multiculturalism without sacrificing its traditional identity? Or is a choice between the two inevitable? And that's the debate that's absolutely raging in Australia right now.